Legislation proposed at the Minnesota Capitol this week could significantly impact ATV trails in our northern region, and it will be under question tomorrow.
Yeah, the bill's authors claim it would help the environment, but those opposed say it could close trails and prevent new ones from being created.
Northern News Now's Ella Showborough heard from both sides and joins us live in studio tonight as a Northland Democrat is now opposing that legislation from his colleague. Ella?
Yeah, Dan and Laura, the bill co-authored by Duluth State Senator Jen McEwen would put in more requirements before new trails can be built and change the management classification for current trails north of Highway 2. The DFL are arguing that it would prevent possible water pollution from ATV use, but those who oppose it, including a fellow Northland DFLer, says the bill is unnecessary and burdensome.
It provides clarity. It also provides protection.
It really isn't necessary. It's not solving a problem. The problem isn't there.
Two clashing viewpoints about a new proposal regarding ATV trails in the Northland. The bill, co-authored by Senator Jen McEwen of Duluth, would put stricter regulations to creating new ATV trails, including banning trails from being near a water source. It would also reverse a law that currently allows state land north of Highway 2 to have motorized access regardless of if they have signage from the DNR.
So our forests and our waterways in regard to official designated ATV trails will be the same throughout the state of Minnesota.
Those opposing the bill argue repealing this law would put existing routes at risk. Ron Potter, president of ATV Minnesota, says that they're doing a responsible job building sustainable trails.
We're not the villains or the impact on the resource that they try to paint us as.
Northland Senator Grant Hochschild, a fellow Democrat, agrees and has pushed his own legislation to expand ATV access.
People that are involved in this effort are doing things right, and we should really promote that because they're the ones on the ground really providing these critical opportunities.
This legislation will take center stage Thursday at a presentation to a legislative committee. Senator McEwen plans to demonstrate how ATV trails can increase in runoff and introduce contaminants into ecosystem.
We're not out there with bulldozers pushing dirt into the swamps or anything like.
However, those like Potter and ATV enthusiasts say adequate environmental analysis is already being done through the DNR.
Interestingly, they propose that ATV users fund to the tune of millions of dollars anti-ATV legislation, and obviously we're very much against that.
ATV Minnesota said they've been in conversation with McEwen about this bill, and they do plan to attend that committee meeting tomorrow.
And this isn't the first time that progressive McEwen and moderate Hochschild have been at odds with each other. How did she respond to a fellow Democrat being opposed to her bill?
Yeah, she said in response that at the end of the day that this legislation is going to help and not hurt these trails and their use because it'll help put those protections in place and maintain them. And that will include requiring an environmental assessment worksheet as well in that bill.
Yeah, definitely a bill that we're going to be tracking for sure. Ella, thank you.
Thanks.